Good morning everyone and welcome. During the next 40 minutes, Eamon and I, on behalf of the Fiduciary, Supervision, Policy and Innovations Division, will be building on the Commission's 2017 industry presentation themes, namely Brexit, innovation and international standards. The first of our industry presentation themes is Brexit. Brexit is arguably the biggest single historical event to occur during our lifetime, and we've interpreted this theme in the context of the landscape within which we all operate. The detail of Brexit implementation remains unclear and contested. However, we know that our local industry can be nimble in times of change and is well placed to capitalise on opportunities as they arise. Taking a step back and looking at the economic landscape in which we operate more generally, we recognise and highlight a number of other notable events. In no particular order, these also include the ever-present headline-grabbing media pressure and scrutiny on tax-neutral jurisdictions, an emergence from a sustained period of low interest rates, the rebalancing of the Chinese economy, the impact of climate change, the continued tide of international reporting and associated reporting acronyms, whether that be LEIs, PATCA, CRS, BEPS or beneficial ownership, plus the increased sophistication of cyber attacks and data breaches. We are all part of the global economy and we're not immune from the impact shocks the economic landscape in which we operate faces. Our challenge is to mitigate where we can the risks that arise from this landscape and seek out opportunities where they arise. In keeping with the theme of a global economic landscape, we would like to take a moment to remember those who have been particularly affected by the extreme weather conditions over the last few months. In particular, our colleagues and friends in industry so desperately impacted by the effects of Hurricane Irma. Whilst it's going to take a significant period of time for these Caribbean islands to recover, we'd like to bring a letter which was published in the Financial Times in September to your attention. This letter on the screen by John Aston, who's the chairman of GIFIX and also one of our local commissioners at the GFSC, succinctly highlights the role the finance industry plays in those affected islands and the importance finance plays in the recovery from the hurricane and in sustaining those local communities. Turning to the role the fiduciary finance industry plays in our local community, the following slides are generated from analysis of the annual returns submitted to the Commission as at the 30th of June 2017, taken together with your financial statements. This slide shows the continued positive trend of the number of staff employed in the fiduciary sector, up this year to 3,703, an increase of just over 5% from last year. Virtually 12% of the total local workforce is employed by the fiduciary industry in Guernsey. This is a material figure, 12%, and demonstrates the substance of work being undertaken in the bailiwick. Consider also the income tax contribution from the fiduciary sector. This substantially builds our local community, for example, pays for the island's schools, roads and social infrastructure. Now, staffing and resources remains a key indicator for the sector, and it's a topic that we virtually always discuss on our on-site visits. We're conscious of the significant costs of compliance associated with running a regulated business in 2017, and we know that more staff doesn't necessarily equate to more income. However, when we look at enforcement referrals, a theme that does come through is that those firms have not always invested sufficiently in staff. Instead, they might have had a higher than normal dividend. This slide provides a bit of a sense check on key metrics for the sector. As in previous years, the number of trustee and director appointments continues to decline, which from our discussion with licensees is part of a proactive strategy to target fewer, more complex structures. Turnover is taken from licensees' financial statements, which, as reporting year-end dates vary between firms, can be different depending on what time you draw the cut-down point. But this is comparing from the 31st of October for every year. You'll see that turnover is broadly flat. Our comment, as in previous years, would be that the fiduciary sector remains stable in Guernsey, but is not in a growth phase. This is further supported by our analysis of the number of licensees. We currently have 40 personal fiduciary licensees and 147 full fiduciary licensees. Now, comparison on the total number of licensees needs to be considered in context. There does continue to be a trend towards consolidation, but this trend doesn't automatically equal a reduction in the amount of business being undertaken here, as is demonstrated by the value and the amount of assets under trusteeship, which has again risen since last year. This slide, again from our annual return, and is therefore a reflection on what licensees tell us. It sets out the assets that are being held for clients. Broadly, the data reflects a picture of stability, a minor movement away from liquid and near liquid assets, reflecting a similar increase in other diverse assets. The level of real estate assets, reported this year at 9%, appears rather light to us, but this is potentially due to asset valuation methods or the property being held by a company. The figures on the screen, again from the data you submit to us, show that 40.2% of new business comes from the UK, 17.1% from Guernsey and Jersey, and 13% from Europe. To add a caveat to this data, this year it reflects each country which has 5% or more new business, and it derives from the residence of the settler of the trust, the founder of the foundation, or beneficial owner of the company. And this has subtly changed from previous year's returns, which used to request data on 7 locations identified by the Commission. And now for something a little bit different. Can you all please take out your mobile phones? If you can switch it on and go to your internet browser. In the internet, if you type in www.slido.com, there is an open Wi-Fi connection GFSC guest in the room for us all. You don't need to log in to get to that, or you can use 3G or 4G, or you might already be logged in to St James's Wi-Fi. Now, I can assure you that this exercise is entirely anonymous. The Commission is not going to be able to identify your responses, and we won't be using any of your answers for any nefarious purposes. So once you get to the screen, type the login code, which is GFSC 2017. And then click Join Event. Okay, so the first question, somewhat of a warm-up. I think it's just coming. Are you all logged on? I think it's coming. Okay, the first question, I'll just ask for a show of hands. Oh, it's up. There we go. First question should be, what do you think the impact of Brexit will be on your business? just got another second or two to respond. Okay. All right, so as you can see, the majority, 62% of people in the room, think the impact will be neutral. Now, as you may be aware, thematic reviews are a key part of our supervisory approach. They help us understand trends and themes in industry, and they help us assess broadly the impact of a particular subject on local businesses. Each year during our industry presentation, we share with you possible thematic topics for the year ahead. And we're going to come back to this later in the presentation. But to act as a bit of a teaser, we'd like to know the answer to this second question. Which thematic topic would make you sweat if we were to choose it during 2018? Okay, thank you. Great, we'll freeze it there. Thank you. That was informative for us. Eamon's going to touch on that later on in our presentation. Now, the thematic topics are chosen because they reflect what we perceive to be key areas of risk or regulatory concern. Now, we're keen for you to consider which broad risk areas concern you for your business the most. Put it another way, what's the regulatory risk that has the greatest potential of keeping you awake at night? This is our third question. Thank you. We'll freeze the results there. Interesting, and you'll be able to compare that to some of our data in a little bit later. So William touched on the subject of regulatory self-assurance yesterday. In essence, we intend to encourage self-assurance exercises, such as this one, as a complement to our formal supervision. By providing self-assurance help sheets or questionnaires as a routine part of our education sessions, we hope to support those of you who are already reflecting on what we share, and to be a more explicit prompt to others of you who may have a tendency to listen, but not necessarily take the further step of considering what this might mean for your business. Now, final question for Slido, in looking towards the future, is one on innovation. What impact do you think blockchain will have on your business in the next 5 years? 1 being little to none, 5 significant. Right, thank you. So as you'll see, there's been 199 responses, and this is the distribution of responses to these questions. Right, thank you. We can move back to the slides. Thank you very much for taking part. I am quite relieved that that worked. Now, if you could put away your phones for the rest of this session. We've been asked about common risk areas in industry, and this is something William touched on again yesterday. One way of monitoring common risk areas is to analyse risk mitigation programmes, or RMPs, set by the Commission over the previous year. This graph reflects the same risk categories contained within the SIDO question, and it breaks them down into the total number of RMPs. As you can see, it's actually quite reflective of your own answers to the SIDO screen. The areas in grey are those RMPs for the fiduciary licensees, and those in red relate to the other sectors, so investment, insurance, banking, etc. And it breaks the RMPs down over the past year, so from the 1st of October 2016 to the 30th of September 2017. Now, put this another way, if SIDO asks you what risk areas causes you in your business most concern, and this is the answer across all of industry, I guess for your own response, can you reflect on how does that differ, if at all, to the RMPs we've issued? You'll note that the RMPs for the fiduciary sector remain highest in respect of financial crime. In total, there are 108 RMPs, of which 46 for fiduciary licensees. And for governance risk, total number of RMPs was 85, of which 17 were for fiduciaries. And to give governance a little more colour, weak governance is a perennial regulatory concern, and it's often the root cause of our enforcement referral cases. If you didn't catch Callum McVean's enforcement presentation yesterday, we recommend you do so once it's available on our website. Specifically over the past year, we've continued to see a trend of somewhat overly dominant individuals within a firm, and a failure of other board directors or non-executives to provide adequate check, balance and challenge. Linked to poor governance is poor conflicts of interest management and control. Now, we recognise that conflicts can occur. What's important is that they are adequately identified and managed. It is simply not okay, for example, for client investments to be used to further the fiduciary business's shareholders' own commercial interests or those of his family, without being adequately disclosed. Now, for operational risk, the total number of RMPs is 77, of which fiduciary accounts for 28 of them. There continues to be a trend of mergers and acquisitions in the sector, which brings with it both opportunities and risks. Our reflection is that some firms try to run before they can walk. A change of control brings with it real operational challenges for firms, and this shouldn't be underestimated. The timescales associated with M&A need to be realistic, and the efforts to shortcut the process, in our experience, just leads to pain and further remediation costs further down the line. And to be clear, RMPs, risk mitigation programmes, are what they say on the tin. They are mitigation plans. They're what we, or sometimes a licensee, has identified as a risk, and it sets in train a programme to mitigate or reduce that risk. Another way of interpreting common risk areas is to analyse triages logged by our division. Overall, there were 408 recorded triages for the fiduciary sector last year, and on average, could be about 3 a firm. Triages are typically matters connected to a firm where we might be immediately concerned, or they might act as a flag for us to raise with the licensee in the future. This word picture highlights some of the most common triages from our experience over the past year. To draw some of those out, the FRR, financial resources requirements. This is firms potentially failing to hold sufficient capital to ensure an orderly wind down of its business should it be necessary. To be clear, we're not a zero failure regulator. We expect that some firms will fail or exit the market. We as a regulator are just focused on ensuring that sufficient financial resources are held to ensure that if a wind down's needed, that it's done in an orderly fashion. Professional indemnity insurance, PII. Now, we've seen some firms not checking the detail of their policies and discovering, potentially too late, gaps in their cover. Or, on occasion, we see an over-reliance on group policies, with some firms' local boards not fully understanding the extent and limits of the particular local cover. Data breaches and cyber security, covered elsewhere and on a regular basis in the media, are particularly a focus at the moment, both for us locally and internationally. As a reminder, we expect directors to be able to continually demonstrate how they have assessed cyber risk in their business and the ways in which that risk is monitored and controlled. You may wish to consider specifically what data you hold, the value of it, and the risk of it, so perhaps compartmentalise it to say this data has this particular value and is more risky. And then look at the controls you hold around that data, attributing to the respective levels of risk. We anticipate that hacks will continue, and it's now more a case of when rather than if. We therefore recommend you spend time planning and preparing for a data breach and agree continuity plans in advance. And these plans should be tested and monitored regularly to ensure they're fit for purpose. And just as a reminder, if you are subject to a data breach, you should notify us at the regulator in a timely fashion, please. Finally, we're conscious of the increased weight of international reporting requirements, and we commend you as directors and leaders of Guernsey industry to continue to ensure sufficient resources are dedicated to record keeping, including your recently introduced responsibilities to the Beneficial Ownership Register. So to conclude this particular slide, and before I hand over to Eamon, these are our current risk observations, all of which need dedicated resources to manage and mitigate them. I'll now hand over to Eamon.
So thank you, Gillian, and good morning, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving Day. As you will be aware, our 2017 thematic was on pension arrangements in the bailiwick. In summary, the pension thematic formed an important part of our fact-finding activities regarding the nature and scale of operations of firms providing services to pension and gratuity schemes in advance of the introduction of pension regulation and the associated rules. The thematic reaffirmed that, as is common in the fiduciary sector, there really is no one-size-fits-all with regard to local providers. Pension and gratuity scheme arrangements are of fundamental economic and social importance for long-term savings and adequacy of retirement income. Our thematic included a review of the transparency of fees and charges to pension members, a crucial element in enabling an assessment of costs, and an area of mixed practice at present. The thematic also reviewed the frequency of bookkeeping and recording of transactions. As in previous thematic reviews, the Commission again notes surprise at the low frequency of such records for a handful of firms. The thematic report and consumer-focused help sheet was published recently on the Commission's website, and we hope that you find it a useful resource. Before turning to the topic for next year's thematic, let's quickly remind ourselves of those undertaken in recent years. As you will be aware, each year, each supervisory division selects a different topic to be the focus of a thematic review. They really are a key part of our risk-based supervisory approach under PRISM. And at this time each year, we highlight a number of potential topics for the year ahead. Earlier in the presentation, using Slido, we asked you which thematic for next year might cause you most to sweat. And for the record, fiduciary duty in respect of tax advice was a clear winner there with 41% of your votes. So let's take a look at the 4 potential themes for next year and see how you feel. To reiterate a note of caution, not all thematics will follow the same process. This year's thematic involved questionnaire to licensees and a number of on-site visits. However, next year's may look and feel different, and indeed may have a cross-commission approach. But to reiterate, they always facilitate identification and understanding of emerging risks. Turning to the second theme of our presentation, innovation. Earlier in the presentation, we touched on the stable nature of the fiduciary sector at present, but cautioned that we are not in a growth phase. In order to grow, we need to innovate, and it remains firmly our belief that a complacent industry simply will not grow. Our first observation is that innovation poses both opportunities and challenges. We clearly observe trends towards the increased use of blockchain, as noted in the poll earlier, and as Gillian commented, we also note the heightened risk and frequency of cyber and data attacks. This year, our Innovation Soundbox has received a number of inquiries regarding virtual currencies and, more specifically, initial coin offerings. The Commission, in line with other regulators, has a stated policy in respect of virtual currencies on our website and adopts a cautious approach in this area, but nonetheless are encouraged by the potential future applications of distributed ledger technology. Our role as a regulator is to help create an environment within the bailiwick which enables innovation and growth. The Lending Credit and Finance project represents a significant commitment from the Commission in that regard, and the consultation paper specifically highlighted a number of areas of potential opportunity which have been touched on during the last couple of days, namely AML CFT platforms, green investments and the regulation of electronic agents. We have mentioned this before, but we are genuinely available for a coffee, and our Innovation Soundbox remains ready to discuss early stages of a new business idea. One such meeting this year was held regarding a potential new substantial piece of business, which was a philanthropic foundation. The Commission was part of Guernsey's red carpet presentation to the key decision makers and their advisors, and we understood this contributed to the business eventually coming here. For a couple of years, we have been aware and encouraged by the prospect of the concept of a data trustee. Data is now clearly an asset and is something people are willing to pay to protect or indeed to steal. We are open to a Guernsey fiduciary with sufficient in-house expertise acting as a trustee of data, and we would be interested to see how such a concept might develop. One of the other innovations which we have seen take off this year, if you'll excuse the pun, has been 2Reg. To explain more, we sent Chanel up to the airport to meet with Gus Patterson, Director of Civil Aviation.
Guernsey's aircraft registry, which trades as 2Reg, has been running for nearly 4 years now. It provides services to the local general aviation community, also to private business jets, off-lease airliners, and also now to the commercial market through the opportunity to apply for an air operator certificate. The latter has been a real growth area for 2Reg. We've seen a significant increase in traffic in that. This week we'll issue our 4th AOC, and we expect to issue another 2 within the next 6 months. Registering aircraft requires a considerable amount of legal and financial work. There's compliance with the anti-money laundering requirements. Guernsey is the only registry to fully comply with the anti-money laundering requirements in due diligence and eligibility criteria. The local legal firms are well versed to help with that. CSPs, particularly with AOC clients who require a more concrete presence in Guernsey to complete the application process, are heavily involved, and there's opportunities in the future. We're seeing particular growth at the moment with air operator certificates, and that seems to be coming mainly, the interest is in Southeast Asia. We're talking to a lot of clients in China. Again, this is a particular opportunity, I think, for the local service providers, because the Chinese are not always familiar with the way things are done in Guernsey, and certainly engaging early on with a local CSP seems to be by far the best recipe for success in that concern.
and our thanks to Gus for his time there. Moving on to our third theme of the presentation, which is international standards. Over the past 12 months, the Commission has provided numerous presentations regarding the Lending, Credit and Finance project. I'm conscious that many of you here today have attended the presentations or indeed participated in the various focus groups and workshops we have conducted. You'll be pleased to hear that I'm not going to repeat the content of the speeches made, save for stating the three key project objectives, which are: to provide a stable regulatory environment that enables the bailiwick's digital strategic aims for business growth. Secondly, to provide a framework that supports the reputation of the bailiwick as a financial services jurisdiction and a good place to do business. And thirdly, to introduce the regulation of lending, credit and finance with appropriate consumer protection. Innovation and change is inevitable and indeed moving at quite a pace. For example, we have heard anecdotally that UK investment in fintech has been growing at 50% per annum, and with revenue from fintech firms estimated to be currently 20 billion per annum and rising. Therefore, we consider as a regulator, it is important that we create an environment or a regulatory framework which can adapt rapidly to accommodate advances in technology utilised by your businesses. However, as a mature international financial centre, it is perhaps surprising that as it stands, credit providers are not currently regulated for conduct or prudential standards in respect of their lending activities. Accordingly, there is no statutory or regulatory protection from unscrupulous lending practices or redress against lenders. In July, we issued a consultation paper and are grateful to those who responded. Responses reaffirmed a strong level of interest and support for the introduction of legislation. We fully intend to continue with this level of engagement and dialogue, and therefore please continue to be involved. So what next? We are currently compiling a policy letter for consideration by the states to enable drafting of the new legislation to progress. Continuing with the theme of international standards, we thought it may be useful to provide an update on the activity of GIFIX this year. GIFIX is the group of international financial centre supervisors and currently has 20 members, including the GFSC, and has a core interest of promoting the adoption of international regulatory standards, particularly in the fiduciary arena. In October 2014, GIFIX issued the Standard on the Regulation of Trust and Corporate Service Providers, and Guernsey continues to work towards implementation. The key development for GIFIX this year has been the introduction of the concept of colleges of supervisors for fiduciary firms. And I co-chaired the first ever college in April, and Gillian co-chaired the second college earlier this month. These colleges provide a useful opportunity to compare notes with other regulators on a specific fiduciary group, and our work with GIFIX will continue going forwards. So turning to pensions. Following initial engagement between representatives of the pension sector and the Commission during 2015 and early 2016, the Committee for Economic Development requested the Commission to lead a review with the ultimate objective of modernising the regulatory framework for pension providers in the bailiwick. Following requests from the states and industry, the Commission issued a discussion paper on the proposed amendment to the Fiduciaries Law in October 2016, and subsequently a consultation paper in May this year. And on 30th of June this year, the Fiduciary Law was updated as detailed on the screen. Therefore, the forming, managing or administering of defined pension and gratuity schemes became a regulated activity. There will be a transition period until 30th of September 18 for firms to ensure that they comply with their respective obligations under these new rules. In this regard, it is important to note that the regulation of pensions is still in its infancy here. However, we are confident that the enactment of these rules further reinforces the robust reputation of the bailiwick as a well-regulated financial services centre. From the initial data we have gathered, it indicates that there are 68 providers locally with 2,614 schemes. For firms engaged in pension scheme business or gratuity scheme business, the new rules have a number of important obligations that they must adhere to, including to provide the details of the scheme to the Commission, secondly, to assess the suitability and competence of any service provider appointed to the scheme, and to provide a summary to new members. Thirdly, to provide details of its complaints procedure, including, where applicable, details regarding the Channel Islands Financial Ombudsman. Fourthly, to consider all member-borne charges to ensure that they are reasonable. And finally, to ensure the responsibilities of all relevant parties are clearly understood. It has been confirmed with the States of Guernsey that primary pensions legislation will not progress until at least 2019 in order to embed the newly introduced regulation and rules. In the interim, the Fiduciary Division will continue to supervise pension providers using PRISM and by the introduction of quarterly data returns. The regulation of pensions and gratuity schemes will be fully incorporated into the supervisory activities of the division going forwards. So, coming towards the end of our presentation, we thought we should take stock of the regulation of fiduciaries, administration businesses and company directors, etc., Bailiwick of Guernsey Law 2000, which is soon to turn 18 and come of age. So everybody, happy birthday, perhaps not. And as we look back, and some people here today will have been involved since day one, we can ask ourselves, how mature is the industry? How far has the sector come? And where will the sector be in the next 18 years? The truth is, the sector is unrecognisable today from 18 years ago in terms of size, sophistication, and indeed complexity. And things that would once have been considered as innovative have now become the norm. This ability to change, adapt, and innovate has served the sector so well over the last 18 years. However, it is vital for us all, as guardians of the bailiwick's financial sector, to recognise that these key disciplines of adaptability and innovation are needed now more than ever. So to wrap up, 2017 has been broadly a year of stability and consolidation, and has yet again presented a unique blend of challenges for us all. Our presentation today has focused on the Brexit landscape, innovation and international standards. During the presentation, we have considered the types of regulatory issues that we see at local fiduciary firms and how those concerns can result in RMPs. However, we should also highlight that we see much good practice during our on-site visits and ongoing assessment of local firms. That's a fact which doesn't often make the headlines. We've also talked about potential topics for a thematic review in 2018 and asked you to consider which subject might be least comfortable to you and your business at this time. And hopefully that gives you personally some food for thought. I should add at this juncture that my favourite response this year when I asked the local director what keeps him awake at night, he simply said cheese. We talked about lending credit and finance law and pensions regulation. And whilst both initiatives have required significant effort, they provide strong examples of the Commission, industry and other key stakeholders working closely together for the good of the jurisdiction. So what can we expect in 2018? Well, as I said last year, we expect next year to look much like this year as our programme of PRISM visits continues and we seek to finish the revision of laws project and further advance the lending credit and finance project and fully implement the regulation of pensions. Clearly there is much on the agenda, and Gillian and I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our team back at the Commission for their support. To conclude, from our viewpoint, it is apparent that as we continue to work together on the significant initiatives mentioned, we will all have opportunities in existing and new areas for good business to be done well. And as Gillian said at the very start of the presentation, it is important that we remain nimble in times of change to ensure we continue to capitalise on opportunities, thus enabling the sector to remain vibrant for the next 18 years and beyond. Now, it seems the clock has run against beating us today. However, hopefully you will know, as been mentioned throughout yesterday and today, Gillian, myself and the team are available for questions. And indeed, you should all have been invited to a number of our open breakfasts, which will continue through next year. However, we will be around during the coffee break if you have any particular questions as a result of today's presentation. Thank you for listening.